Chapter 15 of The Seventh Most Important Thing by Shelley Pearsall. Arthur Owens could hardly drag himself out of the house for his second Saturday of probation the next weekend. It was snowing big, wet flakes. The streets were full of slush. He had no idea what kind of job the junk man would dream up for him to do this time. He really hoped he wasn't going to be pushing the rusty bucket cart around the neighborhood collecting junk from a list again, but just in case, he dug out his oldest winter coat to wear. It was a heavy beige jacket that had these ridiculous pockets and buckles. He'd last worn it in 5th grade, probably. It might have been cool back then, but it definitely wasn't cool anymore. He was amazed and dismayed to find that it still fit, except for the sleeves being a couple inches short. Arthur stuck some folded grocery bags in the pockets, and he made sure to wear a pair of gloves and a hat this time. As he pulled on the black knit hat, he tried not to think about how much he was beginning to act like the junk man. Old tan coat, pockets stuffed with paper bags. All he needed was a pair of foggy eyeglasses, and the transformation would be complete. "Where did you find that thing?" his mother said, catching him in the hallway before he left. Arthur shrugged. "Back of the closet." She gave him a curious look. "Did you lose your other coat?" "No." Arthur avoided her gaze. He could tell his mom wanted to ask more questions, but she didn't. He hadn't told her about the deserted garage or about collecting the 7 most important things yet, and he'd managed to make sure Barbara didn't blab about Officer Billy's phone call. Why make his mom worry even more? Before Arthur's first day of probation, his mom had called Officer Billy to make sure working for the junk man was safe. "When we see him around our neighborhood, sometimes the man acts a little strange," she'd explained. Officer Billy had told Arthur's mom that she should be way more worried about her brick-throwing son than Mr. Hampton, a comment that really irritated her. "That lady doesn't know you like I do," she said in a huff as she hung up the phone. Knowing what his mom was like, all Arthur had told her was that he'd been running errands for Mr. Hampton. "It was pretty easy," he'd said after his first Saturday. "He gave me a list of things to get for him." It wasn't a complete lie, even if his mom thought he meant he'd gone shopping. As Arthur got ready to leave for his second Saturday of work, his mom patted his back and tried to sound encouraging. "Be as helpful as you were last week for Mr. Hampton, and maybe he'll let you off early." Arthur knew there was no chance of that happening, not with Officer Billy keeping track of every second. "We'll work on the Christmas tree when you get back, all right?" his mom continued, "before Barbara gets home from her friend's house." "Sure, okay. See you later," Arthur said, quickly yanking the door shut behind him. He didn't want his mom to see his face and realize how much he was dreading the Christmas tree. Actually, he was dreading it way more than his 4 hours of work for the junk man. Arthur's father had always been the one who put up the tree. 2 weeks before Christmas, he dragged the boxes down from the attic to assemble the fake tree and do the lights. It took him hours and never put him in a good mood, but when it was finished, it was a work of art. That was what he used to call it, a work of art. Some years, they'd leave his work of art up until February, when Arthur's mother would have to dust off the branches before they put it away. This year, the tree was still in the attic. Arthur knew his mother and Barbara were counting on him to take his dad's place. But he couldn't bear to think about putting up the tree himself. Not yet. As he slogged through the slushy streets of the junk man's neighborhood, he tried to get his mind to focus on something else. What kinds of crazy stuff would the junk man have him searching for this Saturday? He wondered. Toilet paper rolls, cigarette butts, used toothbrushes. He didn't think he'd ever be able to find a mirror, if that was still on the list, or light bulbs. Heck, he'd just borrow one from a lamp at home if he had to. He wasn't going to waste time scrounging around for a stupid light bulb. What he'd like to find was a good pair of boots. He glanced down at the pair he was wearing. The rubber soles were cracked and already leaking. A slow dampness crept up from his toes. Since the weather outside was so crummy, he thought maybe Mr. Hampton would have him work on something inside the garage instead. Then he decided it would be better if that didn't happen. He had no idea what he'd say if he finally met the guy face to face, or what the guy might say to him. Fortunately, the garage was deserted when Arthur got there. As he walked up the gravel alleyway, he could see that the door with the drippy address numbers was firmly closed. The side door was locked, and the cart sat in the same spot he'd left it the week before. From a distance, the cart appeared to have everything he'd collected, still piled inside, too. The ugly turquoise lamp, the toaster, the ginger ale cans, the dented hubcaps, the tree branches. Clearly, Officer Billy was right. The junk man hadn't liked any of it. As Arthur got closer, he realized a few things were different, though. Some of the cardboard was gone. and the silver temperature knob had mysteriously disappeared from the toaster. At least Arthur thought it had been attached when he'd left the toaster there. Arthur also noticed a different sign taped to the grocery cart handle. He stepped nearer to read what it said. The first part of the message was the same list of 7 most important things he'd been given the week before, with the same misspelled Arter at the top. But at the bottom of the sign, the junk man had added a few more words. In blue ballpoint pen, he'd written a quote: "Where there is no vision, the people perish." Arthur had no idea what it meant, but he was pretty sure it wasn't supposed to be a compliment.